Hi, I'm Hobie Wan. This is Red Chair Reading. We are reading the Hardy Boys book number 37, The Ghost at Skeleton Rock by Franklin W. Dixon. This is chapter 12, The Tattooed Prisoner. Back at the warehouse, Frank, Chet, and Tony waited anxiously for Joe to return. The police had come and gone. The boys had given the watchman first aid, and he was now feeling better. Joe's been gone almost an hour, muttered Frank, glancing worriedly at his watch. Why don't we get a taxi, Tony suggested, and see if we can find him? Second the motion, Chet responded. But finding a taxi at that hour was not easy, and the boys finally had to go to the airport to round one up. Since the thieves' car had sped away in the direction of Santurce, Frank ordered the driver to try that part of the city first. But 15 minutes of cruising up and down the darkened streets proved fruitless. Take us into old San Juan, Frank said. As they drove into Columbus Plaza, Chet exclaimed, "There's the motorcycle Joe borrowed." It was standing parked at the curb where Joe had left it, but the young sleuth was nowhere in sight. Frank paid their driver and gave him an extra $1 to take the motorcycle back to the watchman at once. The three boys began a search of the surrounding streets for Joe, but the hunt was unsuccessful, and finally they gave up in despair. "Guess we may as well go back to the hotel," Frank said glumly. "But I sure hate to tell Dad that Joe's missing." Mr. Hardy was greatly dismayed by the news. With the gang we're up against, anything may have happened to Joe, he declared. Before he could formulate a plan of action, there was a knock on the door of the hotel room. "You are Senor Fenton Hardy?" a Puerto Rican police officer asked. "That's right." "You have a son named Joe Hardy?" "I certainly do. You have news of him?" Mr. Hardy asked anxiously. "I regret to inform you, senor, that your son is in jail." The officer, expecting to hear almost alarmed protests from the group, was amazed to see looks of relief on their faces. "We'll go see him at once," Mr. Hardy told the officer. A police car took them to San Juan Police Headquarters. Here they learned, to their amazement, that Joe was being held for attempted burglary. A turnkey took them to his dimly lighted cell. "There he is, senor," said the jailer. The blond figure inside was slumped dejectedly on his cot, a livid bruise on one temple, but at sight of Mr. Hardy and the others, he brightened and jumped to his feet. "Am I ever glad to see you people!" Mr. Hardy was about to greet his son when Chet cried out in alarm, "Look, it's not Joe! It's that fellow who resembles him!" Chet pointed out that on the prisoner's left forearm was a pineapple tattoo. To everybody's surprise, the prisoner merely laughed. "Had you fooled, Chet," he said. "It's only a joke. I put the pineapple on myself with this indelible pencil I borrowed from the guard." Frank chuckled with relief. "You're Joe, all right. Someday that stunt may come in handy." "Now that you have been identified," said Mr. Hardy, "suppose you tell us why you're here." Joe told about the basket incident and how he had tried to enter the house by a rear stairway. "Someone conked me. They conked me on the head. When I came to, the guy claimed I was a burglar and called the police." Mr. Hardy regarded his son with a wry smile. "I suppose you can hardly blame the fellow for being suspicious." "That's if he's on the level," said Joe, "but I have a hunch he was more interested in keeping me from finding out what was in the basket." "We'll check up on the place," Mr. Hardy said. After showing his credentials, the detective obtained Joe's release. Although the officer in charge was a bit dubious, he issued a search warrant and dispatched a police car to take the group to the house in question. They ascended the stairs to the rear entrance and knocked. A thin old man opened the door. The policeman said in Spanish that they had a warrant to search the house for stolen goods. The old man seemed bewildered, but allowed them to enter. He informed them that a separate family had lived on each floor. Mr. Hardy and the policeman questioned all the occupants and searched every room with the help of the boys. Nothing suspicious was found, and the man who had charged Joe with burglary was not at home. "Looks like a wild goose chase," Chet murmured as the searchers reached the top floor. Frank, too, was about ready to give up when he caught sight of a small white card on the floor. He took out his handkerchief and wiped the dust off his hands, then dropped the handkerchief on the floor as if accidentally. He picked it up casually and returned the handkerchief to his pocket. A few minutes later, the group left. When they gathered later at Mr. Hardy's hotel room, the private investigator tossed his Panama hat on the bed with a sigh. Well, boys, it was a good try, he told them, but we seem to have run into a blind alley. Frank grinned. Maybe not, Dad. He pulled out the handkerchief and extracted the small white card. I found this on the top floor, he explained, but I didn't want to mention it in front of the people who lived there. Mr. Hardy and the others read the card. In amazement, it bore the words, crudely printed by hand, Cabezona N. Joe whistled loudly. It's the same code message we worked out from those dummy instructions back in Bayport, he exclaimed. This house may be a hideout for the gang. You're probably right, son, said his father, furrowing his brow. But we may have a hard time convincing the police of that. He and the boys discussed the mystery for nearly an hour before retiring, but arrived at no solution. The next morning they breakfasted together in the pleasant hotel dining room. Boy, this iced pineapple juice is sure good, Chet smacked his lips. Just then a bellhop came to their table. He informed Mr. Hardy that a visitor was waiting in the lobby. The detective asked to be excused and left. When he returned, there was a grave expression on his face. Who was it, Dad? Frank asked. A United States federal agent, Mr. Hardy replied quietly. Something new and serious has come up on my case. I'm not free to tell you any more just now, but it looks as though you boys will have to carry on here by yourselves. Frank, Joe, Chet, and Tony enthusiastically said they were ready. Mr. Hardy informed them that he and Jack Wayne would have to take off at once for a secret destination. He quickly finished his meal and said goodbye. After breakfast, the four boys assembled in Frank and Joe's room. It seems to me, said Joe, that the house we searched last night is still our best lead. I think we ought to watch it. Check and double check, Tony said. Frank agreed, but said that to avoid suspicion, they should not all take on the job at once. We'd surely be spotted, Tony. How about you taking the first watch? With your olive complexion, you could pass for a native. Tony grinned. That's fine with me. He promptly left by taxi for Columbus Plaza. The other three boys decided to look through the telephone directory on the off chance that Cabezona might be a person's name. Chet offered to check on this. Only one person in the whole city of San Juan named Cabezona, he informed the others after he ran his finger down the page, and his initials are FX, not N. Let's talk to him anyhow, urged Joe. The boys left the hotel and asked the doorman for directions to the Avenida Ponce de Leon. At the address Chet had jotted down was a haberdashery shop. The owner, Senor F.X. Cabezona, was a stout, jolly man who spoke excellent English. And what may I show the young men? Shirts? Socks? He beamed at his three customers. A necktie, Frank replied. The proprietor showed them an assortment of gay... excuse me, but... The proprietor showed them an assortment of gay ties, then said there were some that they might like in a new shipment just unpacked. He disappeared into a back room. While he was gone, Chet whispered, "This can't be the right Cabezona." "He sure doesn't look like a racketeer," Joe agreed. When the owner returned, Frank said casually, "Your name is rather unusual." "Ah, see," the jolly man chuckled. "In Puerto Rico, the word means the big pineapples, which grow on the south coast." Pineapples? The Hardys and Chet were elated. They had picked up another clue. Maybe the word in the Hugo instructions was and on the card Frank had found referred to the pineapple tattoo. It must be the gang's identification. The affable haberdasher went on. "So far as I know, my wife and young son Carlos and I are the only Cabezona family on the island." Frank and Joe wondered if there could be another Cabezona in Puerto Rico, perhaps living there secretly and leading the underground group. After buying a tie, the boys returned to their hotel. When they reached their room, the phone was ringing. Joe answered. It was Tony calling. "I just saw a guy with a large head sneak into the alley back of the house. How about you fellas getting over there? I have a hunch something's up." "We're on our way," Joe promised. "Meet you at the Statue of Columbus." He put down the phone and relayed the news to Frank and Chet. Both were jubilant. "That man might be the one who trailed us on our way to the trucking company last night," Joe pointed out. Not only that, said Frank, but maybe his nickname is Cabezona. That is the end of chapter 12, and we have 8 more chapters to go. I'll put out for, I don't know, Tuesday or Wednesday, and then on Friday we'll finish up this book. And if you're liking it, please drop a comment. I'd love to know that you're enjoying these readings. I found a veritable treasure trove of Hardy Boys books, and I'll go get them all, and we can just read them. Okay, click the button over there for the next chapter. When I do it, I'll add the button, of course, and click down here to subscribe. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you soon.